Let's get right to NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley in Tel Aviv. Lieutenant General Steph Twitty is with us, former deputy commander of the U.S. European Command, and Nayyera Haq, who was both a State Department senior advisor and White House senior director during the Obama administration. Matt, you've been there reporting from Israel throughout this conflict. What has it been like with these missiles coming into Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel? And how does Israel plan to respond?
Yeah, I mean, Anna, I'm not going to lie, it's been terrifying. There's been a lot of these barrages that have been fired over the past week. You know, really at the beginning, it was much more scary because according to the Israeli military, there were more missiles per salvo fired by the Iranians than we've seen over the past couple of days. And actually, Anna, over the past couple of days, we've been getting kind of a reprieve, which is why this felt so unusual this morning. That strike at that hospital in southern Israel that damaged the facility. You know, we had over the past maybe nearly 72 hours, no fatalities here in Israel. And actually last night, Israeli authorities loosened some of the restrictions on mass gatherings and, you know, people going to work and that kind of thing. So it looked as though we were kind of turning a corner. But then the salvo this morning that only contained a couple of dozen projectiles. Now, according to the IDF, they've said that they've hit about 200 of these ballistic missile emplacements in Iran. They say that's about 2/3 of what the Iranians had in their capability, but they still believe that the Iranians still have enough missiles to continue firing, just as we saw an hour or two ago in northern Israel. So the situation is still very much ongoing, but the death toll here in Israel has remained the same for the past couple of days, just 24 killed, but the number of injured, those were in the dozens this morning in southern Israel.
Yeah, at that hospital where we understand there was a missile that struck. Joining the conversation now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake. And Garrett, what do we know about the president's decision making right now?
Well, Anna, the president remains at least publicly undecided on what course of action the United States should take here. Should the U.S. join in Israel's bombardment of Iran, or should it remain supportive on the sidelines? He continues to get advice from his national security team. He's having a third meeting in as many days today in the Situation Room to review the intelligence. Remember, that team is now functionally quite small, with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, also serving as the national security advisor. Some of my colleagues in our national security team and I reported today that Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has largely been sidelined from this debate. So the president is reviewing what the military options are while keeping his diplomatic options open. He continues to say that he hoped Iran would have made a deal sooner, but he's not totally closed the door on that. And there is kind of a parallel effort underway in Europe with European foreign ministers and Iranian politicians there to perhaps try to come to some kind of negotiated settlement here that won't involve kinetic action, if you will, by the United States. But again, if the president has made a decision, he and his team are keeping it very close to the vest as we round the corner and get to about a week since the shooting started here in the Middle East.
General Twitty, what's your sense? How close is the U.S. to war?
Yeah, well, what I'll tell you, Anna, there's a couple of things that the president is probably considering. Number one, risk the U.S. forces in the region. As you know, there are 40,000 U.S. forces that's in the Middle East. And so he's weighing that risk for sure. The second thing is risk to a protracted war in the Middle East. As you know, we spent a lot of time in the Middle East fighting. We don't want another war in the Middle East, so I'm sure he's weighing those particular options. Number three, I would think, is risk to the global economy. 1/5 of the world's petroleum goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians could try and shut that down. And so we got to be careful about that. And then the last one I would say is we got to be thinking about our partners in the region, the Arab world, and what they think about this. And I'll just add one final one. If we decide to go after Fordow, which is the most fortified nuclear site, with the GBU-57, then that could perhaps have nuclear spillage and that would pose a problem as well. So those type things, I think he's probably considering.
You laid out so many different factors that are going to be part of this decision, a very consequential decision. I do want to ask you a follow-up question on that nuclear site you mentioned, because the stated goal is to take out Iran's nuclear capability, and Iran's most advanced and hardened nuclear facility is that Fordo plant in the country's northwest. It's described as a fortress built inside a mountain, some 300 feet underground, reinforced by layers of concrete. Some estimates say it would take half a dozen U.S. bunker-busting bombs to take out Fordo, but it is believed that the Air Force only has about 20 in its arsenal. The U.S. has never deployed one in war, so what kind of operation would be required?
Yeah, so this is a highly complex operation. It not only includes the B-52, but it's going to include also fighters that will accompany the B-52. It will include surveillance vehicles and aircraft and other things of that nature. And you're exactly right. Penetrates 200 feet below, but rumored that the facility is 300 feet below. So this is an extremely complex operation. I would say you don't have to get all the way down to 300 feet. If you can close the exit and the entryway and prevent the use of the material, then I think you've accomplished the mission.
Nayyirah, if President Trump says it's a go and gets involved, what would it mean for our foreign policy with allies in the region? Is the U.S. already seen as complicit?
The U.S. is seen as complicit because of its general support for Israel's military, both in funding and in training and in supplies. And that's part of the challenge here. We've even heard President Trump in the last few days, even though we don't have direct U.S. involvement, he's talked about we have control over the airspace in Iran, and so he's already adopted this posture, but Israel and the United States working on this and together. The challenge that we see, though, is what will Iran, we can predict what the United States and Israel are likely to do, right? Whether it's the bunker busting bombs in Fordo, whether it's an air campaign, the U.S. Air Force, but we can't necessarily predict what Iran will do in response. We do know that Iran has already moved its missile projections to aim towards U.S. military facilities in Arab countries. So there's a potential for bringing Arab allies into this through conflict, not through diplomacy. We also know that President Trump had the opportunity to talk to European allies at the G7 this week, and he stormed out without having come to any agreement. So the challenge we see on the diplomatic front is that this is essentially Trump making this decision with a very small set of advisors that does not include global allies and certainly does not include appealing or explaining things to the American public.
It doesn't even include, apparently, a key member of his intel team, and that is the Director of National Intelligence, as Garrett was just reporting. General, what is your assessment of Israel's missile defenses after several Iranian missiles made it through overnight, striking that hospital, striking a business district? Fortunately, not many casualties, definitely some injuries, though.
Yeah, I still consider Israel's missile defense umbrella, the Golden Dome, and all the other peripherals, probably the best in the world. And so what normally happens when these missiles get through is a case of that system being overwhelmed. And so I'm sure that they'll do the ground assessment here, but it probably got overwhelmed. The Iranians know that you can overwhelm the system, and that's probably what they're trying to do in this case.
Nayyirah, where does the possibility of renewed diplomacy stand right now?
It's seen some challenges in recent weeks, not least because there was a diplomatic effort that had involved 5 countries and Iran and during the Obama administration. And that was early enough in Iran's development where the IAEA, the UN inspectors being in there, they were able to have a sense of making sure that there was uranium enrichment was slowed down. And we have now, after Trump pulled out of the deal, in theory, been in negotiations with Iran, but Iran has continued to develop. It has the uranium supply. It now is at the point where it's just, looking to see if they have the trigger mechanisms to actually activate the bomb. So that's part of the urgency that Israel sees at the moment. And President Trump, having said that his negotiating position is complete surrender or else, again, does not leave much room in this moment for diplomacy to prevail. At the end of the day, though, as we've seen in other conflicts, you need to end in diplomacy. You cannot war or bomb your way to a peace.
Well, I think what we're hearing from the president is maybe this bombing of Iran forces Iran to the negotiating table to make some kind of a deal. That's yet to be determined and to be seen. Garrett Haake, Matt Bradley, Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, and Nayyera Haq, thank you all for the reporting and the analysis.